Step back, puts up the three, got hit, shot's good, and one! James Harden double team, and a chance for a 4-point play.
Welcome back to the DC pod. I'm Christian, joined as always, you guys know this by now, it's Dallas Diehard Darcy, where we cover all things basketball. Today is Thursday, the 29th of July. We're recording this episode mid-morning, and it only makes sense to jump straight into what has been a pretty entertaining Olympics so far. But obviously we're focusing pretty heavily on the basketball side of things, and that not only covers the full game, but also the 3x3, they call it, which is making its first appearance in the Olympics, which is obviously great. If you want to compare that to a thing like rugby sevens has been in the Olympics for, I think it's its second Olympics that it's been in there now, which is great. So the more sports that we can get in, the better, as far as I'm concerned, and specifically related to basketball. So with it being close to home for Darcy and his heavy involvement in 3x3, we'll make sure to touch on that and give the listeners definitely an insider's perspective, and to also speak a little bit about the games that have taken place. But Das, to kick things off, how have you enjoyed watching the FIBA style of basketball in these Olympics compared to what we know with the NBA style?
I've really enjoyed it. As you know, I've played a lot of it myself, and that's what we play here in all our domestic leagues. And in the NBL, anyone who tunes into that a lot, that's pretty much the exact style that you're getting at the Olympics in the FIBA format. So it's different to the NBA. It's most certainly not based purely on an entertainment value. It's more of a pure form of the game, I suppose. But it's really good to watch the Boomers, because we've really stepped it up, and we're as good as anyone in the world at playing that style. The level of consistency and achievement that we've got with this group, we're really good to watch. And wake up this morning and have us 2-0 is exceptional. And if you want to compare someone who's absolutely a great player to watch in the NBA, it's my boy Luka Doncic. To see what he can do when you get onto that FIBA style, because that game one performance against Argentina, the number 4 ranked in the world, was completely unbelievable. Yeah,
there's really nothing to say. Like, I know a lot of people were, and I included, were basically saying, Slovenia, obviously a team that everyone's spoken about. And look, I kind of got a little bit trapped when we were previewing the Olympics and teams that we thought could really go well. I made the mistake of saying, you know what, too many people are talking about Slovenia, Dust. So I'm going to put them now in the overrated category. And that first game basically just shut me up, because you could already see just the fact that Luka's going to play 32, 33 minutes out of the 40 each game. And if he's on the court, you've got a chance to win, no matter the opponent, based on, how freaking incredible Luka is. But just the fact that, as well, growing up with the FIBA style, and you couldn't have seen someone who looked more comfortable. And he's, out of anything that's happened in, I think, let's say 80% of the teams, the countries have played at least 2 games. I know Slovenia have another game to play. I think it's today. And it's not even close to say that Luka's game one performance was the most impressive thing. And I think the other sort of things that we can obviously touch on, but it's clear that, I think you would want to speak about Luka and his performance the most. But US losing to France, then they crushed Iran by 50. The Boomers beating Nigeria. That was a pretty sloppy game, but good to come away with a victory and kick things off with a dub. And then surviving a tough battle against Italy yesterday to, as you say, push things out to being 2-0 in the Olympics so far. But I think the headliner, it's still Luka. It's what was it, a double-digit lead after the first quarter, and were they almost up by 20 going into halftime? Or it felt like the game was over after the first quarter. Like, what did Luka have? 17 in the first? Like, it was absurd. He came out and was basically like, you know what, this game is done. This isn't even going to be a contest. It's over.
They were up 20 at the half. He had 31 points at halftime. And for a FIBA style game, we're talking only 10-minute quarters here. And for his whole stat line for the game, he ended up in 31 minutes, just over 31 minutes. He puts up 48 points, which is the second most all time in FIBA. Absolutely unbelievable. 18 of 29 from the field. So inside the paint, inside the 3-point line, he was 12 of 15. So absolutely having his way in the post, getting to the basket, a few offensive rebounds. 6 of 14 from deep. So that's a lot of 3-point attempts, but he knocked them down. He seemed to look really comfortable there. 6 of 7 at the line. Sometimes he struggles with the free throw line in the NBA. It looks like the FIBA, game from the free throw line, he seems to be better there. He definitely was at Real Madrid. 8 rebounds, 11 assists. So he was really controlling everything for them, getting his teammates involved, particularly at the 3-point line, when he comes away with, 3 steals as well to go along with it. So for him to be a plus 34 on the floor and an efficiency rating of 49, that's completely, ridiculous. How can someone dominate in the game so much? But I think you just look at Slovenia as a team and how dangerous they could be. It's all based around their 3-point game and how their shooters can get involved around Luka. They hit 16 threes on 37% in this game against Argentina, but they put up 43 3-point attempts. So they're living and dying by it. And it's interesting to see just how far they can go with that strategy. And obviously it's all going to be behind Luka, but he's a joy to watch, and particularly in this style. So definitely tune into their next game. It's today against Japan. So I expect them to win that game pretty handily as well. But, just to watch him and see the way that he's playing, it's some pretty special ball. I think if we move over to the Boomers and the Australian team, it's great to wake up today knowing we're 2-0 in the pool with only 1 game remaining against Germany. So that first game, you touched on how sloppy it was. It was really quite sloppy, with the Boomers having 21 turnovers against Nigeria.
Yikes.
But Nigeria also throwing it away 24 times, which is pretty unbelievable. So, whether it's nerves of coming into the game,
I think so.
First Olympics, it's been 5 years since these guys stepped on the floor in an Olympic Games. And I think the difference in the game against Nigeria in particular was our 3-point shooting. We went 11 of 24 at 45%, and Nigeria just couldn't find anything from distance. They were 7 of 24 at 29%. And then the battle from the 3-point line over to the free throw line, where we were 17 of 19, led by Mills, and they were a dreadful 12 of 24, only at 50%. So they'd really be kicking themselves, Nigeria, for not giving them a legit chance to win this game. And it was still close going into that fourth quarter, but we really pulled away on the back of Mills. He ends the game with 25 points, 6 assists, and 4 steals, and 5 of 8 from deep. So Mills really played a complete game, and that's Boomer Paddy that we know and have come to expect in these tournaments. I thought it was an excellent game from Nick Kay off the bench. He had 12 and 8 in this one. He was a plus 17. Thibault is showing exactly what he showed in the warm-up games. He was a plus 19 in 23 minutes. He racked up 5 steals in that first game. So he's kind of just got an absolute knack for that. And I thought we saw some good things out of Dante Exum. He was plus 5 and scored 11 points and helped us get over the line there in that fourth quarter. Bit of a concern, I think, for Exum in particular is the turnovers. He had 5 in this game, and he does look at times quite shaky bringing the ball down the court. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. I think from the Nigeria side of things, you talked about Vincent and how he was going to be a really important player to stop. He only scored 7 points and goes 1 for 7 from deep, ends up a minus 21, which is the worst for anyone in their team. So really did a good job of locking him up. And I think for Nigeria, the guy who's kind of turned out to be more of their number one option is Noora, the Bucks bench player. In the game against Italy, he ends up with 33 points, 7 rebounds, and 7 of 12 from 3. So he's looking like potentially their number one scorer. And Oni from the Utah Jazz hit 5 or 6 threes in that game against Italy too. So those two guys may be looking like more of a weapon for Nigeria than your guy Vincent.
Yeah, that was well. That's something that's been completely different from the warm-ups to now, the real deal. And obviously we know Laura, as you just mentioned, was with the Bucks for the finals, so he wasn't in Vegas to play any of those warm-up games. So I suppose the team was kind of potentially a little bit of a work in progress at that stage. Yet, if you remember the first game, it took um, sorry, I'm thinking about the wrong team. I'm thinking about Argentina. I was going to say it took a Patty Mills 3 to beat him, but obviously the first game that we all remember was the Nigeria upsetting the US. And maybe that's just the fact that the US were just so accustomed to the NBA style of play, and Nigeria just got extremely hot from deep. And
They did.
those kind of games are just going to sometimes happen, because at the end of the day, they still have 5 NBA players on their roster. So look, they're no scrubs, but it just seems like at the end of the day, they're really lacking just a pass first kind of point guard to set up the team. It seems like it's something they don't really have. Everyone on their group is more a score first type player. And we know that in FIBA, you're going to need guys that really excel in certain roles. You can't have a lineup of 5 scorers, because it's just not going to be able to work efficiently. And we've seen with the US and the stuff that they sort of made with adjustments. I'm not sure if there's a terrible amount you can take away from beating Iran. It's more looking towards when they even match up against a team like the Czech Republic in their next matchup, to get a better understanding of if they've made the necessary adjustments after their loss. But I think it's probably likely that Nigeria don't make it out of their group, given what we've seen and the fact that they couldn't get past a Germany team. And look, Germany seemed to be pretty feisty, and they obviously came out with a bang against Italy, and it really took a strong, almost strong run from Italy, and then a capitulation at the end by Germany to execute to give up that game, because Italy came home really strong and were able to get the W, and that continued into yesterday's game against the Boomers, because that Italy team is just, they scrap, they claw, they definitely have some key players. I can't say his last name, but it starts with F. Fontecchino. Man, he's got great size. He was showing a little bit around the basket, and a couple of times he was able to get Mills defending him, and he was able to take him to the rim and finish with the left for the first basket. And I know he faced up against him and hit a nice jumper, but there's just a lot of things that made that Italy team a tough out. And I think it's potentially going to come back to bite Germany, the fact that they couldn't get the dub against Italy and hold on, because I think it's likely that it's going to be Australia 1 and Italy 2 in that group. Do you feel different?
No, I think you're right. I think Germany have a good chance of being that last team to make it through to the quarterfinals, being the third team in our pool, and I think potentially the third team in that bottom pool with Slovenia and Argentina and Spain. Whoever comes third out of that, I reckon, will still be able to find their way through to the quarterfinals, the knockout stage. Yeah. You're right about Fontecchino. I liked his game. He was 10 of 17 against us, and some of his pull-ups and his off the dribble and face-up shooting was really excellent. He reminded me a little bit of Bogdanovic, the way that he was rising and had a real smooth jump shot. Obviously got not as quick or as good with the ball as Bogdanovic, but definitely got a nice high release and definitely some length. I reckon he could potentially be an NBA prospect sooner rather than later, but we'll see. I think guy who was exceptional in the game and really turned the momentum in the second half for Italy was Nico Mannion. He really stepped up and did some really good things for Italy, taking over the point guard role, getting to the basket. And he struggled from 3 in this game, but was still able to be really effective on the box score. So he goes 1 for 5 for 3, but ends up 21 points and 7 assists on 9 of 15 shooting. So he shoots 60% against the, pretty elite defense of the Boomers in the guard position. So
he had some garbage baskets, Das, to end the game. He took some of those cheap twos. So, but still a good game. It doesn't take away from the fact he was good. But yeah, I just think interesting. He kind of stat padded there at the end when it looked like, especially that last one, they should have probably gone for the 3 because they ran out of time. But he continued to sort of try and take a quick 2. So, but yeah, it doesn't take away from the fact he was pretty excellent.
Their guards really matched it with us in the game, and they did a pretty good job of slowing down Mills. He ends up with 16 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists. I think that shows, when Paddy doesn't get 25 plus points, he's still able to affect the game in a positive way. He's a team high plus 11, which is really great for a guy who's been guarded so tightly the whole game. 5 assists. He does a job on the boards. That's kind of the leader that Mills has turned into for this team. Ingles contributed nicely. He had a key 3 at the end of the game, 14 points and 5 assists. Thibault was still a +7 in his 20 minutes, although he didn't do as much in this second game. It seems like whenever he comes on the floor, there's an instant plus impact for us on the defensive end, and we're able to get a bit of momentum going. But the difference in this game for us is our production from the bigs, for sure. We end up with 5 guys in double figures, but we get our 3 key bigs all have big games. Landale, Kay, and Baines all combining for 47 points. So we really abused what they lacked in the front court, rebounding and finishing around the rim. We showed them how it was done. We end up with 17 second chance points to their 5. So that's pretty critical in a close game. And we win the rebounding 44-30, and we have 16 offensive boards. So you really got to give a lot of credit, even when we're not making outside shots. Our big guys did a really good job of getting on the glass, and we moved the ball really well. 26 assists to 11 turnovers. That's a big improvement on what we spoke about, that stats from the Nigeria game. So overall, even though it wasn't a dominant win, it was pretty impressive style that we were playing, and the way that we were able to generate points was pretty impressive. I thought the player of the game had to be Landale. He ends up with 18 points, 7 rebounds, a steal and a block, goes 7 of 11. So 63-point shooting for him. For me, every time he plays with the Boomers, he's inching closer and closer to an NBA contract. So I think Landale is doing himself a lot of good right now. And interesting that Nick Kay had a really strong performance in this game. He boosted his minutes. He got up to 26 minutes. So Gorgon's really relying on him to be that first guy off the bench. He goes 6 for 7. So 15 points and 7 rebounds. That's another good performance for Nick Kay. And finally, I think the game from Baines was improved. He had 15 points in this one, and he did it all in 13 minutes. So Baines has struggled to find his shot, and if he's able to contribute in a game like this, it goes a long way for us getting an all-round performance. And although it was a tight win, I think it was an important one, and it really solidifies us as pretty much guaranteed top spot in this group.
Yeah, that's really true what you were speaking about with the big men. I know at the start of the game, when sort of things were a bit slow for the Boomers, Baines hit a couple of big threes to kind of get things going there. And then if you parallel that to the fourth quarter, Italy were coming in strong, and Nick Kay hit a big 3 in the corner. I think it was to start the fourth, or it was early there anyway.
You know who disrespected him and left him wide open was my boy Gallinari. And I thought that was one of the most perplexing parts about the whole game is, why isn't Gallinari starting? Why does he only end up playing 18 minutes and only gets 5 field goal attempts? Like, he's the best player on their team. Obviously, he's a bit older now and he's had his time with the Italy team, but I don't understand when you're getting beaten down inside and you've got a guy who's playing, stretch 5 in the NBA, basically, at times in the Philly series, going up against Embiid, and you're not putting him on the floor. I'm not sure if that's a tactic to save him for later in the tournament, potentially, but he was basically a non-factor in this game, which I thought was really surprising.
Yeah, I have no idea why.
My guy Melly was starting at the 5 spot, playing the whole game, but I think Gallinari is shown to be a lot more effective player than him.
Yeah, look, it is confusing. I've got no idea why. I can't remember how many minutes he played against Germany in that first game. I felt like he played more than he did today. But
still didn't do much.
But even if Gallinari wasn't going to play a lot against the Boomers, wouldn't you think he should be on the floor in pretty important closing stretches? And he wasn't there in those last 3-4 minutes when it was pretty back and forth. And I think Australia were fortunate that they were managed to come away with some big offensive rebounds and tap outs too. I think one was maybe Ingles for a 3 and something else, maybe just a reset of possession as well. But you summed it up perfectly. The story of this game against Italy was the dominance of our bigs. And look, this is another thing where I can hold my hand up and say, you know what, I was wrong. When this squad was announced, I obviously mentioned to you I was a bit worried about the big man spot for the Boomers and the rotation and the depth. But again,
so far, so good.
Seems to be something that's not an issue at all. And I know you mentioned Landale and how much he seems to be pushing in the right direction for getting that NBA opportunity next season. Is potential that we should be speaking about Nick Kay in the same vein, that he should get an NBA opportunity, or is it potentially he could get exposed in the NBA game, which is obviously so heavily reliant on athleticism. And if you can't provide athleticism, you need to, I suppose, be able to shoot the ball. And it's clear that Landale is probably a better scorer or shooter than a guy like Nick Kay. But Nick Kay is very much is the big man version of Dellavedova, right? Mr. Fundamentals, does everything right in the right spot, doesn't kind of lose his head, always seems to be, under control. I'm sure he's got enough attributes to, force his way onto the court in an NBA type environment if given the opportunity. How do you feel about Nick Kay's, I suppose, NBA prospects?
I think for sure. I think he definitely has built his game around those important aspects that you talk about: being a great teammate, being an excellent rebounder, being a great screen setter, obviously proficient on the defensive end, really strong when able to guard guys in the post. But you're right that there's an element of him being a tweener potentially in the NBA with the lack of ability to hit multiple 3-point shots, which a lot of teams are playing their fours out that wide. But also, is he quick enough to guard some of the fastest four-man in the league right now? But he could definitely guard any big guy in the post. I think he's an exceptional defender, and I think if he's given an opportunity in the right situation, he could be a really good backup power forward. I think he could do a job on the glass and give you good minutes. I think he could definitely play in the NBA. It's just a matter of whether he can find that right fit, and he's still got a little bit of time to kind of prove himself in this Olympics. I think for sure, because his role will be absolutely critical as we get down to the medal games. If he's able to produce like he has in the first two games, and I think he's going to get on a lot of NBA teams' radar, which is really interesting. He left the NBL last year to take a year in Spain and test himself in that level, and he's had a pretty good season there. So I think he's doing all the right things to get towards that level. So I think the shot that you touched on is probably the biggest, most crucial part to him potentially getting a contract. But in terms of what he does as a player, I think every team could use a guy like him, no matter what the style.
Yeah.
I think as we look to the game against Germany, it's an important game, even though we're probably favoured. And I think Germany, even though they hurt themselves against Italy in that matchup, especially in the fourth quarter, but they're a tough team who will probably come out all guns blazing against us, and there's a chance for us to potentially lapse in concentration a little bit. They've got Voigtman, who's a veteran guard for them, who's scored almost 20 points against Nigeria, and Maudou Low is a pretty wet shooter.
He is so impressive, Maudou Low. Oh my God.
He went 6 of 9 for 3 against Italy for 24 points. And so these aren't big names, but these are guys who can really hoop, especially in the FIBA style, and be a good test for Dellavedova and Mills. There's no easy games in this Olympics. There's only 3 pools. There's only 12 teams. All these teams can definitely ball out. And even though they're missing the likes of Dennis Schroeder, and they're definitely a little bit slight on the inside with no Daniel Tice and no Maxi Kleber, but Mo Wagner, he's only playing 18 minutes over the first 2 games, which is a little bit confusing, but he is averaging 15 points. So he's been really effective in this style.
I like the role he plays for them. It's best suited. If there can be sometimes where Wagner just he's an energy guy, right? He's almost their sixth man. He comes in and all he needs to do is score and ensure he's really giving that team a spark, which is what you want out of some of your bench guys. So I think the balance actually has worked quite well. Then it would come back to really Germany kicking themselves that they let that Italy game slip, because it's very likely they would be 2-1 and assuming that Australia get the job done against them, can be looking at a second place finish in that group, which is obviously pretty valuable. But I know that a lot of the times it's mattered in the past, but with the new structure of how they're doing the basketball, they're doing a World Cup style draw for the quarterfinals. So the top 3, obviously, if you win your group, and then the second best team out of the remaining go in a pool or go in a hat, of 4. And to determine who that second best team is will obviously be for and against and the points that come into it. So those 4 in one hat, and then the other 3 teams that were the second best, right?
The pools are of 4, so there'll be 6 automatic qualifiers into the top 2 in each pool automatically qualify for the quarterfinals, and then there's the rest of the teams will be fighting off for those last 2 spots. So Germany would be right there in that for sure. But like you said, you definitely want to be secured in by winning 2 of your pool games.
Yeah, and I suppose the point I was kind of making, but obviously it's confusing to explain because it's obviously different. But just because you win your group doesn't mean you're guaranteed an easy quarterfinals matchup. So you can draw, especially the fact now that the US has lost. For me, it's hard to see France not winning that group. So it's likely US will be the second, and as a result, unless they're that 4th team to be in that hat with the 3 teams that win their group, they're probably going to play.
See them.
They're probably
we could see the US in the quarter,
which is dangerous. So in the past, you've right from the first games in the groups, you've been able to kind of project forward what the pathway would be to medals, but you really don't get a chance to do that now until this quarterfinals draw is done. And then you can obviously see who you'd match up in the semis, and then a gold medal match or a bronze medal match. So it really is going to come down to an element of luck, no matter how well you kind of do in your group games.
Speaking on that US loss, how do you feel about their chances to potentially win gold after being outplayed by France, particularly in the 4th quarter? They were outplayed, and it looked like the US couldn't really score on them.
That was an interesting matchup. So here's one thing that I'll, kind of praise myself a bit, Das. When we were previewing this matchup, we mentioned a bit about spreads and as well some of the betting odds, and the fact that France were $5-6 in the end. So got on that money line as well as took France in the spread. So was happy from a betting perspective, but also I think the thing that they kind of struggled to deal with the US is immediately the physicality seemed to almost surprise them, but I don't understand why that would be the case, because they surely got a good test and sample for that in the exhibition games. So Kevin Durant got in foul trouble for that game in particular. And they struggled to deal with Gobert, obviously switching. There was a lot of times where Dame was caught on Gobert. And while you can always front that, France seemed to, especially guys like Batum, who else was good? I think Yabusele was good in the minutes he played as well. You just immediately make that cut to the free throw line, and then you get the ball from the wing. Yeah, high post flash, exactly. So I think the US really struggled to deal with that, and then they just settled for outside shots a lot. So France obviously did a great job of forcing them to take those type of shots. And obviously you speak about it all the time. The presence of Gobert does really affect teams' ability to score efficiently around the rim. And I think in the end, as much as we give France a lot of credit for their 4th quarter execution and the play of Evan Fournier, he shot the lights out and hit some really important threes. Even Batum hit an important 3 in the corner there off a out of bounds play. And I think what I come back to from the US side is, I'm not sure what Popovich is doing playing Draymond and Bam together. I thought when they had a stretch run of those two seeing the court at the same time, it really affected the US's ability to, score. And I know it's tough to find a balance of, playmaking, defense, and scoring in sort of the same lineup with the guys the US have, because they're all, stars and important guys for their NBA teams. But I think that wasn't the right option. And France doing a great job of making sure the US don't get out in transition and don't run and showcase their athleticism. I think it's kind of the perfect mixture of poor decisions, obviously the US settling a lot, and the fact that France are obviously just another one of these European teams that never say die. They'll always play the full 40 minutes, and they're an experienced group and they've been together. So I'm hopeful for the sake of, being really competitive in the quarters and the semis, that loss kind of lit a fire under the US. And obviously the fact that they have a lot of guys back with Middleton, Booker, and Holiday, I'm hopeful that, they can start to be a real threat and juggernaut, because it would be a real shame if they didn't make it out of the quarters. I think just for sake of being I know from a selfish perspective, it would be great for the Boomers if they made the semis and the US were already knocked out in the quarters. But I think if you want to be the best, you want to beat the best. I think that's always something that, and it would mean so much more to the Boomers if they were able to get past a team like the US
Absolutely.
in order to medal or get that gold. So, look, as I said, I think it was a perfect mixture of a lot of things that went wrong for the US. France staying in the fight. Good play as well from a guy like Nando De Colo, who kind of held the fort, and if potentially a bit of a revenge game because he obviously played for the Spurs and Popovich when he had a bit of a stint in the NBA. But yeah, I think in the end, I would probably say as much as France did a great job, the US I think were up by 8 points with 3 minutes to go in the fourth. So you've really got to find a way to close out that game.
You're right. I think there's a massive amount of improvement for the US from this game in particular that they can make. They looked in control almost in the first half, the way that they were shooting the ball. I think there's a couple points that you could just lean straight to it and go, all right, this is why they lost the game. Durant basically fouled himself out of the game, had no flow, wasn't part of it at all. Just silly fouls, reaching in stuff. That's an adjustment that you expect Kevin to already have made in terms of how the FIBA game is officiated. But him and Lillard were awful, really. They ended up with 21 points on 31% shooting, so that's their best two most explosive offensive players. In the second half, they just didn't show up. But I don't think it's quite as simple as that. France, they win the rebounding by 6 and they're 2-point shooting. So they're shooting inside the 3-point line. They're up at 60%. So France were really dominating and kind of having their way inside the paint when they got good looks. And you talked about that high post flash whenever they were posting up Gobert. That was absolutely critical, and I thought excellent coaching and it's a really difficult thing to guard. And I thought a guy who was really critical in that was Poirier, the Celtics center who basically never got any burn last season, but he was really great in his limited minutes. He only plays 10 minutes and ends up at plus 12. So that's basically one of the key moves that got them the win with that second half adjustment right there. Gobert almost gets a double-double, 14 and 9. You talked about De Colo. He had some big threes. He was a plus 14 for the game. So he ends up with 13 points of his own. And you can't go past the performance from Fournier. He really carried them with taking lots of field goal attempts, but ends up at 50% and gets 28 points. I think some of the biggest buckets of the game were when France were able to out hustle or just make that 1% play to get the ball and get it in kind of broken play. And Fournier really made the team pay with some excellent shooting. Fournier is a guy who a lot of people talking about Boomer Paddy and how much he steps up. Fournier has been an absolute freak for France, basically the last 2 or 3 tournaments that they've been at. So for France to take this win off the US, it's the first time the US have been beaten since 2004 in the Olympics. So big time win and a big momentum builder for France. I think they've kind of thrust themselves as favourites of the competition now. But I would also agree that the US have a lot of improvement to make. It's the first game. It's the first game for Middleton in this one. It was the first game for Booker. I thought Booker looked a bit out of sorts. Booker was looking at the refs for some calls that you're just not going to get in FIBA. And Drew Holiday, I thought he looked really good athletically and physically, but he shot the ball really poorly in this game. I think he was 33%. So lots of improvement that can be made for the US. And you touched on it. And I think that's probably the biggest hole in their roster is they don't have legitimate size in the paint. And for everything that Adebayo and Draymond do athletically and playing basically as guards and distributors on the offensive end, they don't bang in the post and they don't score on the block. And that's really what this US team is missing. So they're really going to have to rely on their ability to get out and transition, as you said, and shoot the ball at a really high clip. I think that's the absolute key.
Did you say France favorites?
Well, France knocked us out of the bronze medal game at the World Cup. We have beaten France before, but we certainly haven't shown that, that we're capable of definitely knocking off France. They're going to be a hell of a tough out.
So the 3 teams that have obviously impressed so far, right? It's us, it's France, and Slovenia. Out of those 3, you would think France would be the favorites?
I think so, yeah. I think also Spain. They only had 1 game, Spain. I'm very interested in this game tonight. I was going to touch on this just now.
Okay.
This is an absolutely huge game for Spain and Argentina. Obviously, Argentina need to bounce back, need to get a win on the board. And this is a rematch of the World Cup final. Argentina need to get something out of Scola, Campazzo, and their guy Deck, who's now for OKC. But you look at the Spain roster, we talked about it before when we did the preview, that they're absolutely stacked with veteran talent and skills. It's all kind of orchestrated by Ricky Rubio. He was 20 points and 9 assists against Japan, a plus 25. He absolutely killed it. Pau Gasol actually looked okay in his minutes out there, surprisingly, at 40 years of age. And they've also got Alex Abrines, who's kind of added to this team, who wasn't there at the World Cup. He was a pretty capable shooter in his couple of years in the NBA as well. So I think Spain, they are the World Cup champions. They've basically got the same team. They're going to be a really, really tough out in this format. And I think France are right there as well. So that's 10 p.m. that game tonight, Spain and Argentina. Definitely a big one to look out for.
Yeah, I think Spain win that quite comfortably. I think Argentina, there's something off with them. They suck. I think Gabriel Deck was just atrocious against Slovenia. I know bloody getting some bench minutes for OKC, as you've mentioned a lot, but I wasn't impressed with him at all. I thought he was pretty sloppy, and I think their team just doesn't have that same punch. I mean, if you're going to be relying as good as he's been on Scola and even Campazzo to make some important shots from the perimeter and really create there, I think you're asking a lot. And you just mentioned how stacked Spain are, and they just have a lot of guys. So I'd expect them to, whatever their spread is, I'd expect them to cover that spread and actually take care of business quite comfortably. I hope it's not famous last words, but just to go back, the couple of things you mentioned with the US and the France thing. So US, bang on about Booker and Middleton. If you were Pop, would you have even bothered playing them? Like they had just gotten off the flight. That's we've said it as well in the past. It's a 12-hour flight from the US, basically the West Coast, or at least the middle of the country anyway, across to Tokyo. So on top of the time difference, 12-hour flight. They're obviously just coming from the NBA Finals. You mentioned Drew Holiday obviously playing the best out of those three. He played 26 minutes or something ridiculous. And while he didn't score the ball well, he was probably a key reason as to why they were able to really stay competitive and at least keep a minute, as you said, dealing with a bad Lillard game and Durant being in foul trouble. So what do you make of Pop playing those three? Because Booker and Middleton may as well have still been at the hotel as far as I'm concerned.
I think there's two factors. The first factor is you lose Bradley Beal. You lose your starting shooting guard. So you're not going to rely on Keldon Johnson all of a sudden to play a bunch of time when you've got these all-stars and all-NBA caliber players. And I also think that if you're a coach like Pop, if you're coaching in a tournament scenario, the first game, obviously you really want to start well and you want to win. And from a coaching perspective and a rotation perspective, you want to get your best group out there and have your rotation solid. But the fact is they haven't practiced. This group hasn't practiced together with these three. And they really had to play these guys. They had to allow them to get some feel, had to allow them to get some reps, had to allow them to try to feel somewhat comfortable. And obviously they were incredibly comfortable in that second game against Iran because, they shot the lights out. And I thought Middleton in particular looked really smooth, looked really good. And Booker got going a bit there in the third quarter. Obviously it's just against Iran, but they need those reps. And although it was a tough loss to take and they're copping a lot of heat and flack over in America for that loss to France, they're still going to likely make it through to the quarterfinals if they're able to get over the Czech Republic. I think if the Czech Republic game is tight, then you really might have to consider shortening that rotation. But you want to get these guys involved and hopefully try to get them playing well, because once you get into that quarterfinal matchup, it doesn't matter who it is, it's going to be extremely difficult. And you need these guys. These guys have earned that right to be in the rotation. So I'm not too critical of Pop for that. I think in a tournament, you have to play the long game, especially if you're the US. Obviously, you can't lose another one, but you really got to make sure that these guys are definitely in your best 7 or 8 in the rotation. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Yep. So find a way to get them reps without practice.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just to sum up that before talking about some 3x3, France played Japan in a warm-up game and Japan won. And this game was actually in Japan. So do you remember me on a pod, if it was last week's pod or potentially pod before, where I was speaking about Japan getting an upset win with Watanabe and Hachimura basically doing the heavy lifting for them, but I couldn't find the team that they beat, because obviously it wasn't that accessible to find a lot of the information on exhibition games and pre-Olympic warm-ups. But yeah, they obviously beat France. And so I think potentially there was a little bit of that. But the reason why they were able to win that was I think Batum had just come over from the Clippers, losing in the Western Conference Finals. They didn't have DeColo. It was kind of all a little bit rushed. Almost feels quite similar to obviously the US and getting Booker, Holiday, and Middleton over. And so I think people were a little bit low on him. But that game, I think, was played 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago. So, and that was in Japan. That was somewhere else. It wasn't in Tokyo, but that was somewhere else in Japan. So France have been together in Japan, getting, acclimated for the last 2 weeks. So and obviously, they've been together for a while as a whole, but just getting the group back together for this Olympics tournament in particular, I think they had a little bit of an advantage over some other teams. And so maybe there's an underrated aspect to people saw that loss against Japan and started to write off, France's prospects for the tournament. So I think that's an interesting thing to speak about. And then the final thing is Dame said a quote after the game. I'm sure you would have seen it, where Dame said, "A lot of guys play differently for their countries." And I mean, of course, maybe Fournier isn't a 30-point game scorer against against NBA players in a normal NBA setting, but you can also say the same thing for the US. Like their guys play differently for their country as well. They all play dog shit. So like
you hear the commentators when Lillard makes a shot go, he averages 28 a game for Portland Trailblazers. He's not averaging 28 a game in the World Cup. It's not happening.
Exactly. So I laughed when I saw that quote, because it's like, you guys were shit. And, immediately it's like, man, those guys aren't. It's similar to people who made comments about some NBA guys that really balled out in the bubble. And while that's probably a more accurate thing to say, like in a normal NBA season with a crowd and whatever, and having to go on the road and perform, a lot of these guys don't show up, but they did in a bubble type setting. And so that's fair to probably say, look, that's an anomaly how well a few of these guys played. But it's just funny, man, just poking holes and saying, all these things, just subtle cheap shots. But the main thing is like, yeah, the US played differently as well. You guys were all horrendous. And, you're just coming off a pretty terrible performance and not getting the dub. So, obviously something to keep an eye on, as well as, the Boomers playing their final group game that we just spoke about with Germany. And then Slovenia, if there's one game you want to tune into, it's probably going to be that Slovenia-Spain matchup to finish out the group game for them, isn't it?
Absolutely. That'll be a ripper.
Yeah. So we can't wait to see that. I'm sure that would, if it's not on the weekend, it's probably going to be early next week. So stay tuned for that anyway, and stay glued to your 7+ app, which I'm sure many people are locked into at the moment. So
it's Luka up against a lot of his, I think 3 or 4 of his Real Madrid teammates before he left for the NBA. So it should be a really good matchup.
There you go. Okay, so 3x3 dust. So this obviously, as you mentioned off the top, hits close to home for you, being so heavily involved in the sport and being a big part of the Supersonics, or the Sonics. Or is it the Supersonics? Did I get it right?
Sydney Supersonics 3x3.
Sydney Supersonics. There you go. So Das is obviously a big part of getting that up and going and really kicking that off in Australia, which is extremely exciting. I know you're obviously really passionate about the sport, not only getting the team up and going, but you playing yourself. So you obviously would love the fact that it's getting a run in the Olympics and it's getting some more publicity and shine, because it's really the first big stage that it's going to be on. I'm not sure in a regular year how much TV time 3x3 gets, and especially if competitions are happening over in Europe or other parts of the world, it's not ideal for Australians to be up at late hours watching those games. But I suppose before going into my thoughts about the whole thing, how have you found the 3v3 tournament that's taken place in the Olympics?
I think it's been awesome. I think the way it's been received, and people are watching it for the first time, they're really excited about the sport. And it's another form of basketball. It's another form of 5-on-5 for us that love hoops. This is just another way for you to engage with the sport and engage with fans across the world and countries all over the world that absolutely love basketball and want to do something that's really special. I think the way that it's run as a tournament structure with 8 teams in the men's and the women's, you get to play everyone, so you really get a real feel for how personal this game is. It's a 3-on-3 game with one sub in a half court, and we're in a packed outdoor stadium. That's the key. This is an outdoor thing, a big amphitheater that they had built there, beautiful in Tokyo. It's a real shame that we couldn't have fans, because it's a real fan spectator sport. The fans are literally on top of this half court, and they'll be making lots of noise, and you're under an extreme amount of pressure. And I suppose the occurrence of big time highlights and really special plays is crazy. It's a lot higher than the 5-on-5 game, which I think you probably noticed there's quite a lot of stop start and a lot of blown whistles in the 5-on-5 game. But 3x3, it's super fast, super quick. We're looking at some of the fittest athletes in all the team sports in the Olympics. It's been awesome so far. There's a few teams that are big time favorites, and mostly based out of Europe. So you asked there about where does this 3x3 game get played? There's basically the FIBA World Tour is a huge thing in Europe in particular, but there are a few countries in Asia and Africa as well that basically throughout a World Tour season, there will be a World Tour event basically every week for about 6 months. And a lot of them will bounce around Europe, and teams who are on the World Tour will obviously travel to all these different countries and play in these big tournaments on a weekend where they'd play, close to 6 games and then get into quarterfinals, finals, and finish. So what's unique about the 3x3 format is it's always played in a tournament format. So when we're going to start running stuff here in Sydney, you would come to play for us. You don't just play for a week and then come back for round 2 next week. Come in and you play 3 or 4 games, a semis and a final, and we have a champion for that day. So that's really where 3x3 has a unique and special kind of style. And what I love about it is it's really creative, and it's an urban style, and people who enjoy the street ball and pickup style of basketball will really get involved in this. And what's important about it is that it's for everyone. It's not just for the elite style. What we're seeing right now is in the Olympics is some special elite players, but this can even be played men's, women's, masters, kids. This is really a thing that is accessible for everyone, even just your casual basketball fan who wants to go hoop with a couple of their mates. This is the style for you. I wanted to ask you, Chris, because I'm having a lot of people come up to me seeing this stuff for the first time, and what I want to know is, can you see yourself playing this kind of sport, and what are your first impressions of what we saw at the Olympics?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, I mean, it's a no-brainer, obviously, for a guy that loves basketball like me, whether it's not only playing, but obviously talking about it and watching it. Like 3v3 it's an easy yes. There's no real convincing that needs to happen. I think the game I tuned into in particular was Serbia-Netherlands, and that was to kind of one of the earlier group games that kicked things off. And look, initial impressions from watching it, because I hadn't watched a full game from start to finish other than highlights in the past. Now, I don't know if this was just a matchup between the two, but extremely physical, and at stages it became a real slog. And so I'm definitely not going to go as far as to say that that's an accurate representation of how all games are. And it didn't become unwatchable, but it just became very hard to stay tuned and locked in. I think the immediate thing I thought is, if this was happening, I suppose, in an NBA game or a 5-on-5, what opens things up is, getting in transition. And, it's tough to do that with obviously playing in a half court, like you said. So I'm not sure how that can happen, or ways that can sort of open up the game to have it a bit more. Because obviously, if the first NBA game or the first basketball game you ever watch, just to throw out an example, is game 3 of the playoffs, Milwaukee against Brooklyn. And, it's a 86-84 game. And if you tuned into that, unless you're a basketball purist, but if it's your first game, you're probably going to be like, oh, okay, that's not that fun. There's a lot of, defense and missed shots, and it really became hard to see the ball go in the hoop. But if you tune into, and your first game is, a Wizards Pacers game, and the score's 140-135, you're going to be like, whoa, there's a lot of baskets, and guys are getting up and down the floor, and they're running and they're shooting threes, and everyone loves that, right? So I think the initial thought is, how could potentially the game in that instance be opened up a little more? But maybe that's just the fact that, it was kind of a first hit out for a lot of these Serbia and Netherlands players to kick off their Olympics, because you just spoke about how sloppy the Boomers Nigeria game is, and we all know how good the Boomers are. So it's not an accurate representation to say it is a slog type of a game. But I think initially, when you're speaking about sort of first impressions, that was what I took away straight away from that. So I do have some other points, but is there anything you wanted to sort of speak about based on that side of things when the game kind of tightens up and it becomes a real battle?
Absolutely. So transition as a style for 3x3 is different. So in 3x3, when someone makes a basket, you don't inbound the ball. It becomes play on. So the other team picks up that ball and instantly takes it out. So that becomes your transition. So
Okay.
when you're looking to get up a quick shot, when you're looking to change the pace of the game, so one team scores a bucket, if they lose concentration for a second, the other team grabs it, chucks it out to the 3-point line, and they take that shot. And the 3-point shot, it's actually 2 points in 3x3, and everything inside the 3-point line is 1. So then we're not talking about, it's 50% greater for a 3-pointer rather than a 2-pointer in the NBA or in our FIBA style. But in 3x3, it's 100% more to hit a shot outside the 3-point line. So now it becomes an incredibly important shot. And what you saw in the game against Serbia, so Serbia and the Netherlands, Serbia in particular, they're 4-time world tour champions. And basically 3 out of the 4 guys on the Serbian team at the Olympics were part of that World Tour Championship team. So they're actually the best in the world at that. So what you would have seen, the Netherlands are also a top 5 team in the World Tour. So we're talking about 2 teams who have played this game for 5+ years, and they absolutely know everything about the rules, know everything about the style of play. And what they were doing was completely nullifying the other team's ability to get into transition and to get open 2-point shots. That's why you're seeing a lot of guys inside the paint slugging it out, a lot of fouls. That's how, I suppose, the elite of the elite supermen's level, they basically give you nothing. They give you absolutely nothing, and it becomes a slugfest. You're absolutely right. But what can open up the game and what ultimately tends to decide it is the 2-point shooting, and the ability to get in transition is the key. So whether that's from a free throw, whether that's from a missed shot, or importantly off of a made shot. So if I'm guarding you, Chris, you drive right by me and make a layup on me, if you get past me, I'm just going to let you go, and I'm going to run out to the 3-point line. My teammate's going to get the rebound, kick it out to me, and I'm going to hit a 3 straight away. So now it doesn't matter that you got past me for that layup, because I just got an extra point from 3. So we're talking about a whole new style and a whole new way of playing. And I suppose at times it can be incredibly exciting. And anyone who tuned into that gold medal game, Latvia went whack for a couple of big 2-pointers to win the game, 22-18 at the very end. And I just know it would have been an absolutely insane atmosphere to see that with a packed crowd at a nice outdoor court in the middle of the summer. It's a magical kind of thing.
Yeah. So that queries that main concern. So you've done a hell of a job there to come back at me, Das, with a great response. So the next thing I have is, if we're just looking in comparison, what I mentioned when speaking about the 3v3 to start, comparing it to a thing like rugby sevens, where it's it's shorter, quicker format for the rugby union, the 15 aside. A couple of names. So sorry to get a bit rugby heavy here with people, but a guy like Beauden Barrett and Rico Ioane, who are both All Blacks, they really made their name and got started in the sevens format, and then were able to transition over to the 15 aside for Super Rugby, and then obviously they were good enough to get picked for the All Blacks. So I suppose, is it possible for 3v3 players, or 3x3 players, sorry, to use that game, to use that sport as a platform for them to make it to the NBA, for example, or to make it to a professional league? Because then that would obviously bring some more notoriety that, rugby sevens is full of young talent and they can play for their national side, and they can play at a really high level. Can we sort of see the same thing in 3x3? Because it obviously kind of goes without saying, no matter what the sport is, people are attached to teams and they're attached to players, and that's why they get involved. So is there potential for that to happen? Has it already happened? That would be another thing.
I think for sure it's a lot of these players, basically from all over the world, are pro level players, whether it's
Okay.
in their in their national competition or in the Euro League. And a lot of the highest ranked players in Australia for 3x3 are former NBL players as well.
Okay.
So in terms of, the progression and where you can go with 3-on-3 at the moment, it's particularly in Australia, it's more of a compliment. We're talking about guys who are already trying to excel in the 5-on-5 game, who are looking to play more, who are looking to travel more, who are looking to, expand their game and try to win some money while doing it as well, which is a really fun part about 3x3 is the ability to go there and win a big fat novelty check. But definitely for sure, there's been some Australian players in particular who have really taken their 5-on-5 game to another level due to their experiences in 3x3. I think about a girl named Beck Cole who plays with the Southside Flyers in the WNBL. She was kind of on the fringe of WNBL level talent, and over the past 4 years has become basically the face of women's 3x3 in Australia and become the number 1 ranked player, and really built a lot of confidence in her one-on-one game and her shooting and her overall ability to attack the basket and be a complete player, and has transitioned her into being a starter for a WNBL team that ended up winning the championship. And she was a sniff at the Opal squad that's gone on to Tokyo as well. So it definitely is a tool and a driver for players to definitely improve their game personally, because if you compare it to potentially being a bench player on a 12-man roster, or you're in a 3x3 team that is playing, you're basically begging for someone to sub you off because of how much you're playing and how much you're touching the ball and how much you're involved in the game. So in that aspect, I think development is huge. And in terms of pathway to bigger professional leagues and onto the NBA, it's just a matter of 3x3 growing in notoriety and people understanding the game and knowing where it is and how to watch it. It's got a really good live stream capability right now. Like, it's being streamed on multiple websites. In particular, the YouTube stream is huge, and the World Tour with so many games going on every single weekend, that's the main spot to watch it right now. And we're hoping that really grows. And in terms of what we're doing with the Sydney Supersonics and through Australia, what we want to do is ultimately have a tour around Australia where people can become pros and can play within a team structure. You talked about affiliation to a team, and that's what is happening in Europe. Throughout the World Tour, all the major cities in Europe have a 3x3 team, which has significant, $1 million sponsorship and an incredible following. So these teams are only smaller teams of 4, and often they need teams of 6 or 8 because of all of the touring and all of the games. And a vision for us is to not only have, a pro tour where there's a men's team in all different cities around Australia, and also we want to get to rural areas, and it's a really important part about what we're doing with CLB is to not only build in Sydney, but to build clubs all around the country, because there's not just basketball fans in big cities, but we also want to have women's teams, and the women's 3x3 circuit is still absolutely huge. And if you're able to catch any of the women's game, these girls can absolutely ball and could definitely be playing in any pro league in the 5-on-5 style. So there's lots of room for growth, and I think it's just a matter of people getting to know and getting to watch some of this game to understand that it's a different form of basketball. It's a unique style, but it's a lot of fun, and we're seeing some really good basketball, and I hope we continue.
Yeah, so I think as well to mention that it's really interesting you speak about the women's side of things as well, and what we saw in the Olympics, because I noticed with the women's US team that they had a couple of WNBA players. Kelsey Plum was one of them, who she was coming off major surgery, but she's an absolute baller when healthy, and got a nice lefty stroke and can kind of do it all. But I think it would be interesting to see now that it's gotten, much more, well, the most exposure it's probably ever gotten, right? Being on an Olympic stage and people around the world seeing it all kind of at the same time. Mm-hmm. The next Olympics, what would we see for the US team? Can we get some guys that maybe won't be in the full game, the 5-a-side? Can we get potentially some more fringe NBA players, or even some other NBA guys that want to give it a crack? I think that would obviously help to take it to a new level. I know Draymond in particularly, Draymond Green, he posted on Insta that it's entertaining as hell. He obviously loves.
It's definitely his style. Definitely his style.
Yeah, 100%. You could see Draymond in there. He would absolutely love it. So it goes without saying. I think that the final point is obviously to extend further off the fact that fans and people are drawn into it with teams and players to follow. So for the Pro League in particular, obviously following, I guess, a similar model to the NBL, they really started to take off when they were able to secure some of the next star guys and some of these ex-NBA guys, whether it's a Childress or Al Harrington, or start going back to the early days, and then obviously now with main guy being like Bryce Cotton, or bringing Delhi home, or anything that's sort of gone on, or LaMelo Ball, like the RJ Hampton, the list goes on, and that's really taken the NBL to a new level, and they just obviously announced a new TV deal that was a new 3-year deal with ESPN and Foxtel and KO Sports there as well. And they obviously didn't release the figure, but it's the biggest deal that they've ever signed. So obviously shows that it's going places and it's really moving up. So I'd be curious to see down the line, obviously, if some big names can obviously be a part of that pro tour, that'll obviously play a major role into potentially expediting the growth of 3x3, because then it will just skyrocket to get names in for people to join. And you can immediately think of, even if it's much less of a street ball type environment, because it's quite physical and it's hard to play. Just thinking a guy like Jamal Crawford, watching him play in 3x3, like, oh my God. Like, I know obviously he's a slight build and could potentially, people can get physical with him and have his way. But just the thought of him being there on the, 3-point or 2-point line and just pulling up and getting 4-point, well, it would be 3-point plays, so not 4-point plays. Yes. But obviously we most know him for getting the 4-point plays in the NBA, and was a 6 man of the year and all the crossovers and all of that. So I think the takeaway is just, it's an exciting time. Obviously it's going to play this Olympics is going to play a big role in getting a spark of interest for people to not only tune in to future tournaments around the world, but to get involved with the game themselves. Absolutely. So it feels like you personally, Darcy, are in a really good stage, because people are, you're obviously there before the growth period and the period where it really takes off. So it's obviously an exciting time for you personally. But yeah, I think it goes without saying that anyone who loves playing ball will definitely be, tuning in. I think just from a professional perspective, and if you're comparing it to the NBL and then the similar model, is how soon and how feasible is it to get a few big names, because that obviously then that'll bring the eyeballs and take the thing to a whole new level.
Mate, you're absolutely right. You talked about the women's USA team, and they had 4 WNBA players. Katie Lou Samuelson, who had COVID and had to pop out. That's Stephanie Dolson. She was a 3-time national championship winner at UConn. Their team really was stacked with WNBA talent. And you talked about Kelsey Plum, the number 1 scorer all time in college basketball. There's some big names already, putting FIBA 3x3 on the map. And a guy that comes to mind as you were speaking right there was 3 or 4 years ago on the World Tour, Alfonso McKinney. A guy who was really starting for the Warriors only a couple of years ago in the NBA Finals. But I think he's with Cleveland still now. But he was a 3x3 player on the World Tour with Team USA, and that was part of his development in becoming, an NBA player and ultimately getting that contract. So you're right that there's definitely some notable people that we want to get involved. And not only is it potentially a sport, well, it definitely is a sport that players and pros can prolong their career by, extending to this form of the game, but also there's people who don't quite necessarily make it as a pro, or haven't necessarily been told by whatever coach or whatever representative association is in their area that they're good enough to be part of this rep team or this pro team. 3x3 is a great avenue for those people to travel, to continue to play basketball and develop, to meet lots of people, be part of a big basketball community, and have a lot of fun and travel the world as well. So lots of positives there. And I think anyone who's listening to this and really wants to get involved, definitely come straight to me, because we're excited about the opportunity and want to get people playing.
Yeah. So I know from what you've told me anyway, as soon as things can get back to normality, or as close to normality as it gets with the current, lockdown in New South Wales and Sydney, that being able to get involved with 3x3 will be something that's very easy to do. I know you're doing a lot of hard work behind the scenes now, and as soon as things open up and we can get back to community sport and whatnot, there'll be plenty of opportunities to jump in and get involved. And I think people will be chomping at the bit to do so after sort of being stuck inside and watching it on the TV. I know, just for example, always when it comes around to watching Australian Open and the tennis, you just feel like going and having a hit at a tennis court yourself. And that's,
Absolutely.
whether you suck or not, it's just, you see it and you get amped and you want to get involved. So I think it's a easy parallel. And I think something for me personally, it's something I definitely love to jump into. And even the look, I think I know a fair bit about basketball and how to play and the right way to play. But even the point you just made as an example about the strategy to, let a guy blow past you to make the layup, because then you can position yourself and have an advantage to then hit the three. And of course, if you're playing an experienced team, the switching can obviously help out with limiting that. The guy closest to the perimeter, if they know you're
Absolutely.
a 3-point shooter, can jump onto you, and someone who is closer to the basket can just switch on to the guy that blew past you for the layup to try and, I suppose, limit things things like that from happening. But I think even that, what you just mentioned, I didn't even think about that, is because most guys, you get beaten and they go to shoot the layup and you want to go grab the ball out of the ring or try and contest them at the rim, or, get ready to throw the ball in and inbound it. So I'm sure there'll be a little bit of an adjustment period. But yeah, I think the thought of it is very exciting. And even if you want to go, look, in a normal 5v5, you're going to get less touches. That's just the maths.
Absolutely.
There's more people on the court. So, with 3v3, it's as simple as you get more touches, you get more opportunities. It is, as you say, a great way to really develop your game. And it is a quicker way to, get, as you say, get opportunity to potentially.
You're going to get fit playing it, no doubt. It's extremely fast.
Exactly. And then on top of that, there's, as you mentioned, there's 4 guys. There's one on the bench. So even when you're on the bench and out of the game, it won't be for very long. So obviously, and I think parents as well, parents in Australia. So just, you would know as well, from obviously being a coach with the 5v5 as well from the main side, and me doing a bit of coaching with basketball. Parents all the time are steering away from involving their kids in sport that consumes a lot of time, be it a cricket or any form of game that takes a while and takes up the Saturday and takes up the weekend. So there's been a lot of people that have obviously wanted to get more involved in basketball, just due to the fact that the 5v5 is very quick game, and it only takes an hour out of the weekend for the parents to go there, and then they can get on with the rest of their Saturday and Sunday. So now that 3x3 is involved, if that can start to get pushed more into schools and be in competitions like GPS
Absolutely.
down the line where they have 3v3,
Absolutely.
and that obviously will make a huge difference, and will only further add to the intrigue for the sport itself. And I think parents will automatically be drawn to that.
Absolutely. Very excited. 10-minute format. It's unbelievable how many games you can get in an hour and a half. We could get a tournament of 4 teams where everyone plays a minimum of 3 games. So it's a wicked fast style. And yeah, our hope and what our vision is for this to be a complement to what's happening. We want to work in conjunction with 5-on-5, because I still love the game, and all of us here at the Sydney Supersonics love the 5-on-5 game and really enjoy it. We don't want to diminish it in any way. We want to complement and add to the ability of players to play more hoops and to become better players overall. So really exciting, and yeah, desperately keen. Make sure you get at me if you got any questions or you're keen to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So that takes care of things, unless there's something else to touch on. I think we've hit on quite a lot with Olympics. So we're, well over an hour into the pod, and I think we've discussed everything we've needed to with Olympics. So now to transition to what's the most relevant in terms of NBA circles, and that's the draft. So that takes place tomorrow. I think it kicks off at 10:30. So that's obviously Friday, the 30th of July. And Das and I.
The season begins. The NBA
Correct.
season just finished and it's
Correct.
beginning again.
Because it jumps straight into then summer league, and then there's also free agency, and then before you know it, training camp kicks off, middle to end of September, and then the season kicks off middle of October. So scary to think that it's less than 3 months away from things getting going again, and we're in the grind and the slog of another NBA season where there's 10 games on every day and you don't know what to do with yourself. So all very exciting. It's definitely turned into a 12-month sport. There's no real off season, but yeah. So the draft so between the last pod and now, you and I have done a little bit of homework on looking into the prospects, and we've come away with picking out a couple guys that we want to speak about that we really like, and not necessarily the obvious guys, but it can be if that's what you've been researching or looking into. And then we were going to speak a little bit about our respective teams, with Philly having the 28th pick in the draft, and Dallas not actually owning a first rounder, but you do have a second rounder.
No, we don't have a single pick.
You don't
in
even
this draft,
so you don't have any picks.
But I'm very, very certain that we'll make a move to get one.
Yeah. So, and you can still speak about a guy that you think would fit in with Dallas anyway, even if it's, completely unrealistic that Dallas might pick him up. It can just sort of be another guy you really like the thought of and his fit with your group. So I'm happy to kick things off with my first, and then you can kick things off with your first guy. So look, this is a little bit of an obvious one, but I like to think it's a bit different in one respect. So the guy I want to talk about is Jalen Green. And the reason why I think I'd take him first, like I know that's a lot of people are saying Cade Cunningham's a lock, and he's got such a high floor. There's a really appealing aspect.
Green was the number one guy out of high school ahead of Cunningham.
Was he?
In his class before going into college. Green was the guy who, he ended up choosing going the G League route instead of college, and Cade was able to jump him with his college performance. Okay,
well, there you go. So there's another thing that I didn't know, but just from what I was able to watch from the last week of basically reading stuff, hearing what other people were saying about him as well, I think he's going to be a star. There's something about him that makes me think, look, no one's Kobe, but it's very much this kid has, such a level-headed attitude towards everything. He seems as though he's soaking up anything and everything. He always very respectful of elders and veterans, and he's always taking on board, advice that's given to him. And I kind of think those people that, aren't coming in acting like they've been there and done it are the ones that are more likely to succeed and easy to root for is one thing I'd say. So I think he does have potential to be one of the best shooting guards in the league. And I think it's okay. And it's fair to say that he's very much built in the Zach LaVine mold and Bradley Beal mold. And he has that, combination of athleticism and it's such a variety of ways he can score. And, anyone who was able to tune into his G League highlights or any G League games, if you're able to see, impressive. So he's effectively been in a professional type environment for that season. They similar to the NBA were able to play in a bubble type scenario this year, and that gave him really good exposure and gave him a chance to go up against some really talented players and men that are really fighting to get their opportunity in the cracks in the big leagues in the NBA. So he was by far the most impressive on that G League Ignite team that was obviously stacked with talent. His teammates obviously with Kuminga, which is a guy that's spoken about a lot in this upcoming draft, and he's quite a polarizing guy because it seems as though he's slipping personally down the draft boards. But I think if Jalen Green was to play college DAS and get obviously a lot more exposure along the lines of a guy like Cade, it would definitely be a lot of umming and ahhing between Cade and him if there wasn't already. I think it would definitely, kind of lean to play in his favor. It feels like any deficiency that he may have defensively, he'll be able to figure out because I think he's 6'5", 6'6", He's very what's the right word to say? Is it quick fiber muscles or quick twitch? Like everything he does is he seems to be able to pick up very, very quick and very fast. And any feedback that was given, I think the coach of that G League Ignite team was Brian Shaw. He obviously coached in the NBA circles for a while there, whether it be with well, I think they were the Hornets?
Oh yeah, Charlotte.
No, the Pellet was the New Orleans team before the Pelicans. What was their name? Wasn't it?
They were the Hornets. Yeah.
Oh, they were the Hornets.
New Orleans were Hornets for a bit after Katrina.
And the Charlotte with the Bobcats. That's right. So when he coached with New Orleans the Hornets, he has obviously got a lot of experience, coached as well with the Lakers, and he raved about Jalen Green and his professionalism. And I think when Jalen Green comes in, it's not going to be an adjustment for him in terms of the pro lifestyle and the sort of NBA grind and always being up against pros and traveling and getting used to that type lifestyle. There could be a bit of an adjustment for that with Cade, but I think something about him is telling me to trust my gut, and my gut is saying that this guy could be an absolute superstar. And I say this many times, Das, it could be famous last words, but I think I'm more than happy to take the punt on saying he could really be something special. And definitely, I think a Levine Beal type player is well within reach, and he could even surpass him to be a guy we think to first when we think about the best shooting guards in the league down the line.
Interesting. I like that. He's definitely a guy who's been surging upwards, basically, since the mock draft started coming out, or since they started getting real serious at the end of the NBA season. He's a guy who feels like can only kind of go up in his stock and what people think of him. It'd be interesting if he was the first pick, he'd be the first G League player or formerly D League guy to, get drafted in the number one pick. So it reflects a lot on how the G League has improved and has become a, a genuine place, not only for players to showcase their talent, but a place for guys to develop and make that transition from high school or from overseas to the NBA. And for him, you touched on, the coaching and the pedigree of a guy like Shaw, saying that, saying such glowing things about him. And I know that Jared Jack is an interesting guy who still has a kind of a dream of coming back to the NBA, played multiple seasons in the league, was very successful as a point guard. He was a point guard on that G League team as well, and he spoke extremely highly of Green's potential to be an exceptional player and be a real player in the NBA, even in his first couple of years. So a lot of the mock drafts like Cade Cunningham and have like Cade the whole year, but as we inch closer, there's definitely some doubt as to whether he is the best player in the draft, because Detroit, they're that team picking in the number one spot. They need basically everything. In particular, they need a guy who can score the ball and can be a stud for them and be a pillar of the franchise. So I think you can't go wrong with either of those two players. And it's interesting, that you lean towards Green, because I've watched a lot of Cunningham, and I do like a lot of his prospects, but there's certainly nothing definite about him. I think that makes it a certainty that he'll be the best player in this draft. I think that's why they talked about a lot of the conversations around this draft has been who in that top 4 or 5 who all look like great picks, who's potentially going to be that guy who stands out and is the face of the class. It's going to be really interesting. For me, for my first guy that I really like, it's a guy who's also probably, if it's not Green, he's the next highest guy who's actually rising up the rankings as we get closer to the draft, and that's the Australian Josh Giddey. I think he's been one of the most talked about guys in the last month or so, in particular on the back of a strong performance with the Australian team. Obviously not going to Tokyo, but had a really strong performance in that big win we had over Nigeria. Nigeria just removed from a couple of wins over USA and Argentina. He was excellent in that game. Josh Giddey, for those who don't know, he's a 6'8" point guard who's come out of the AIS and been basically a prodigy of the Australian basketball system. He's 19 years old right now. He's an exceptional ball handler, great passer and rebounder. He's the 3rd ranked point guard right now in terms of mock drafts and this class. So, which is pretty outstanding. We expect him to get picked in a pretty nice position. In the NBL last year, he played almost the whole season, averaged 11 points, led the NBL in assists with 7.5 a game and 7.5 rebounds, shooting 42% from the field. So numbers that aren't too dissimilar to LaMelo Ball, who's only a year removed from, only a 3 or 4 game stint in the NBL where he really turned up and had a couple of big triple doubles. Giddey had 3 triple doubles in 4 games in the NBL in the last season. So for anyone who wasn't ticking in, he was really showing people what he can do and showing his overall floor game that if LaMelo Ball's anything to see by it, it will really translate to the NBA hopefully in his first year. For me, I think Giddey probably, there has been some conversation about whether he could be in the mix for the 7th pick, which is owned by the Warriors right now. Apparently he had a good workout with them and the Warriors are interested and really think that he's a pretty good prospect. For me, if I had to make it, that'd be awesome if he was to get picked that high. And I think That would be a really nice fit. He could really play that point guard spot and distribute for the Warriors. Almost definitely a bench player, but I feel like he's the type of guy who understands basketball and moving the ball. It'd be a really nice fit with them. But I think it's more likely, if I had to put my bets on it, that he'll land at the 10th spot. I think the Grizzlies would also be a nice fit for him, even though it feels like they've got a stack of point guards now. But I think that's a good situation. We're a team that's really up and coming, and he could be an important part of that. So really great for Australian basketball to have someone in the mix so high in the draft. And it's awesome that he's, being talked about as potentially coming up at the very last minute to get picked in that mid-lottery spot.
Yeah, he's a fascinating prospect. Really, really like his chances of coming in and being able to impact immediately because he has one skill that's translatable and it's elite, and that's passing. So there was a lot of question marks, and you made the comparison with LaMelo Ball and his situation, and there was a lot of question marks around LaMelo Ball's shooting and his shot selection, not on top of his form and technique being a little bit unorthodox. The shot selection was always a bit of an issue, and I suppose the baggage that was going to come with the LaMelo Ball experience. But the one thing we knew would translate immediately was the passing, and you saw that. And obviously the Hornets style of play this season and getting up and down the court really helped
fun.
Him showcase that passing ability. And I think you could see the same out of Giddey. So that's obviously a really great selection there for a guy that, again, he's another one that I think is another similar to Jalen Green, just easy to root for. You hear any interviews with him, anytime he's speaking, just a very likable guy, and seems to be very driven and motivated in the right way. So I think if he does get to Golden State, that'd be awesome because seeing him as next to that shooting backcourt, he's even if Draymond's off the court, you can see Giddey on there as potentially the primary playmaker in terms of being able to pass and find, because you see Draymond as the guy that's always the one that's firing the ball out to Steph off pin downs and letting Steph go up and shoot, or Draymond getting the ball off a pick and roll and then finding the ball, getting it in the middle and then finding the shooters off the rotation. So there's definitely potential that Draymond and Giddey could even play together. But I think it's a pretty cool scenario to think about, just how he would fit Giddey in that team. And obviously with the fact that so much of the attention would be on Steph and Clay, it would really open up things nicely for Giddey, and he doesn't go into a situation where he's potentially the second best option on a struggling team. So I think the fit is a really nice one that you mentioned. So super exciting to see where he ends up. And it's hard to see him, especially after you just mentioned that Memphis having the 10th pick. It's hard to see Giddey going beyond 10, isn't it? It feels like if Golden State don't take him at 7, it's pretty likely that Memphis snap him up at 10 if he's there. So pretty cool for the last high pick we obviously had of recent times that feels like a proper Australian. To me anyway, was either Dante Exum or Bogut that was that high, because Ben Simmons, yes, he was Australian, but he's kind of grew up and played ball in America and all of that sort of stuff. So it's definitely exciting, and this one feels a lot more closer to home.
Giddy is a Melbourne Tigers junior and has been coached by Andrew Gaze basically his whole junior career through that representative club in the Melbourne Tigers. So
There you go.
you're right. This is the Australian pathway. If you're the elite of the elite in the Australian, the junior Australian teams and the AIS, and you're able to show off your talent in the NBL and then potentially get drafted in the lottery of the NBA, it's really special and it's really awesome that Josh is getting this attention.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, so my second guy, Chris Duarte. So he's out of Oregon, and he's been a bit of a late riser. So I think people will remember from the last draft, the late riser, and he just shot up the draft boards. That was Pat Williams out of Florida State. And obviously there was a lot of appeal with him being the youngest guy in the draft class, and just the potential about his build and developing jump shot, and just the thought of what he could develop into became so tantalizing. And it seemed as though he went from, I think it was late lottery to the fourth pick. And I remember at one stage he was pegged to go 11th to the Spurs. And, in the end, he jumped up, another 7 spots to go fourth to the Bulls. So the Spurs ended up taking, obviously, Devin Vassell, but his teammate. But I think you can compare a guy like Chris Duarte in that respect to Pat Williams, because he's obviously not going to go that high. He's not going to go fourth. But he was, from the beginning, I think, spoken about as being an early to mid-20s type pick. But now it's likely, obviously a day out from the draft, that he's going to go late lottery. It's likely he'll end up in that 14, 15 spot. And I think the fair comparison to anyone who hasn't tuned into Oregon games, especially during, the COVID season, it's Cam Johnson. He's that mold 100%. And we obviously just saw the stuff that Cam was able to provide for Phoenix off the bench. So he's a mature player. He's 24 years old. Again, similar to Cam Johnson, being an older prospect coming out of North Carolina. Duarte is a great shooter. He is what Cam Johnson is. He can do a little bit off the dribble in terms of if someone closes out to him, he can just take 1 or 2 dribbles in and still take a pull-up. He's obviously not going to be able to create a terrible amount off the dribble and be the number one go-to guy, but I think he's a really sound defender. And those kind of 2 things force me to say it. I hate saying it. A lot of people say it, but he is your prototypical 3-and-D type player. And the fact that he is ready to contribute right away, being a more mature guy, being 24, that is pretty old. But he can come in and help a team right away. So there's been a lot of hype that's been surrounding him over the past week, 10 days, as I've just said, that's really skyrocketed his value and where he'll get picked. But I've seen as of late, there are teams that are in, the 19s and 20s. One, for example, is the New York Knicks, who own the 19th and the 21st pick. And the rumor is they're busting their ass to try and package those two to get higher up in the draft, to get in the Chris Duarte range. So interesting to see, because if there's one thing a team like Knicks didn't have, it was obviously shooting. Beyond a guy like Reggie Bullock that you and I spoke about. And it seems as though they can pretty safely, unless disaster strikes, you'd assume they'd be in the playoff race again. So, for next year. And so I think there's obviously a few holes they would like to fit, and they don't really want to take a guy that potentially would need a bit of development because they already have a guy that, in Kevin Knox, that's still young and he's still developing himself. And you just don't want to build up too many of those guys. So I think just overall, Chris Duarte, it's the most accurate comparison is Cam Johnson. And I think it's a very good one.
I like it. I think Oregon recently they've come out with some tough NBA players, right? Not only is this guy athletic and he's got the measurables, he's tall and can obviously shoot the ball, but it feels like that program's been very successful, and they've brought out some really tough players and some guys who look to be sticking around the NBA for a long time. And you look to a guy like Dylan Brooks, who stayed around in Oregon for I think 3 years before moving to the NBA, and is really in this past season proven himself to be an elite level player and a starter in the NBA.
He has been very good. Yeah.
If there's one thing you can't not say about Brooks is that he's not tough. He's an incredibly tough guy, hard nosed, and interesting to see if this guy can make it make it in the NBA and find a spot in a roster. There's definitely some teams who, especially at the top of this draft, who really need some rotation players. They're really unsure of what they need. And the Knicks is a team who don't feel much deeper than about 5 or 6 players. So that'd be an interesting landing spot for him for sure.
Yeah. And Peyton Pritchard is another example of an Oregon guy that's come out and shown to be pretty handy for Boston.
Stayed to a senior. Yeah. Guy
Yep.
who was ready to play straight out of the year, had a really good, I think he was, a bit of a snub potentially for
I think so.
Rookie team.
Yep.
Mm.
So your second guy.
My second player. So I've gone with the best player on probably the best college team last year. So Jalen Suggs from Gonzaga. He's a 6'4" combo guard. He's got real speed. Like, he's an electric athlete, really dynamic, getting to the basket. He's a skilled scorer and a proven leader. The way that he led that team. Team ends up with a 31-1 record. They lose in the national championship game, but with a freshman point guard leading the way and leading them to 31 consecutive wins, to me, he's definitely a prospect that everyone at the very top of the draft should be looking at because of, just his ability to be a winner, to lead a team, and basically with hardly any blips. He barely played a poor game in the whole college season. So his averages for the year, 14 points, 5 rebounds, 4.5 assists on 50% shooting. And he averaged 2 steals a game. So he's definitely a two-way guy. Guy thrives getting to the basket. Obviously can shoot the ball if he ends up at 50% from the field and they go all the way to the championship game. Big two-way player. And for me, I think it's a really nice landing spot for him if he does go to Toronto in the 4th pick. I think if Mobley and Green and Cunningham are off the board in the first 3, I think that Suggs is your guy if you're Toronto. I know they do have a couple of small point guards right now at the moment, but I'm really interested to see what happens with Kyle Lowry because I feel like he's probably a guy who won't be on the team next year, given what happened on the trade deadline when he was convinced that he was gone and they didn't quite get a deal for him. But I feel like it's basically a situation that a bit unsalvageable and they really need to kind of take a new direction. And I think you can't really go wrong if you end up with Suggs leading that lineup and assisting Van Vliet in the backcourt. I think you're going to be real fast and real dynamic next year if you're Toronto.
Yeah, and he has a background of being a quarterback, playing football. So he has that passing vision, which is obviously stuff that we've seen of some highlights throughout the season.
Anyone who watched the Final Four, he saw probably the biggest shot of the whole tournament was that game winner bank shot that he hit in overtime against UCLA. That was probably the moment of the tournament. So he's a guy who I think you can't really go wrong with selecting him. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that pushes forward to kind of the bigger question of, I think Toronto has got to be up there with one of the most interesting teams moving forward. Like, what do they do? I wonder if they
go from contender to top 4 picking in the draft in basically a year and a half.
I wonder if they decide to go, you know what, Lowry's gone. Do we try and see what we can get for Van Vliet? Do we see what the market is for Siakam? And, just start again and potentially build around, your OG, your Gary Trent, and potentially a guy like Suggs, if that's who they end up taking. So pretty interesting offseason for them. I wonder what they'll get up to. Okay. So look, this is not, I don't have a third guy now. Philly pick at 28th. And I wanted to try and look and find a guy that could potentially help us and suit our needs. But I think the best thing we can actually do with the pick, Das, I think we got to find a way to trade it and get someone that can actually help us. I'm not sure if it's 28 in the first round. So look, I saw this one. I'll see if I can find it. But this guy tweeted something that can work really well for packaging that pick. So if we were, for example, to do George Hill and the 28th pick, that would match salary in a deal for Larry Nance. So
definitely a guy who could become available, Nance, definitely.
I think it is, if the draft goes sort of as you plan it, then Mobley would be on the Cavs with that third pick. So that again sort of makes, as you've just said, Nance available if potentially he isn't already. And I think that would really help with Philly moving forward because obviously we overreacted a couple of years ago to the Toronto series, obviously the Kawhi shot, and Embiid was exhausted that series. He was doing it all, and at the end of the day, I think the thought from the front office was if we have a good backup, that can help take a lot of the pressure off Embiid during the regular season. And then it can give us some, surety in the front court when Embiid has, his spot minutes on the bench during important playoff games. So that's why I guess they overreacted and signed Al Horford. Obviously, the Al Horford experiment didn't work out. That was obviously a big L, but I do understand the thinking in trying to get Embiid some help there and for them to have a decent big man when Embiid isn't on the floor. So I think the Dwight thing, would that surprise? It wouldn't surprise me if he's brought back, but I think in the playoffs, it's ideal if we have a guy that can switch, a guy that can space the floor. And Nance has an improved jump shot. He is obviously very athletic. He's a high energy, high motor, and he's a guy that will always compete. And I think there's some important things that is what we should be looking for. And so I would say getting a guy like Nance is more important than anyone who we could pick at the 28th spot. So look, Nance is just an example. We might not even get him. We might end up, using the 28th pick and taking a player there that potentially we like. But I would be inclined to say we should trade along the lines for some veteran pieces that are of areas of need.
I'm on board with that strategy for sure of trying to get someone to help right now. I don't know if you're getting a younger player who needs time to develop. It's not going to be a lot of court time for him in a team like Philly, who are number one record in the East, and a team who's ready to contend right away. This guy would have to be ready to play basically instantly and fit in the lineup. So I like the strategy for sure for Philly. I think Nance is a really intriguing player from a standpoint of what his trade value is, because a lot of people like him potentially as a fit with their team, and at times he shows unique abilities on the court. He's defensively, he's a menace. I think he was second or third. He was really right up there in steals last year in the league, coming from the power forward position. We've seen the kind of dunks and that he can throw down, and the way that he can rebound the ball at a really high rate. And he's shown the ability to knock down some threes when he's hot. He can knock down some shots as well. And he's a guy who plays quite well with others. He gives you a kind of an all-round for Cleveland. He's been giving them an all-round mind the last couple of years with some assists as well. I think he's averaging over 3.5, 4 assists a game. So really intriguing player. Hasn't really been able to stay healthy the last couple of years, which is a little bit of concern. But that could lean better towards his trade value. Cleveland probably think pretty high of him, but if you're not able to get much, that in a trade, that might just be how it is, because it doesn't feel like he's going to be a major part of what they're doing going forward. And who really knows what that is? If you pick Mobley, that gives them certainly some direction. If they're able to re-sign Jared Allen, I know he's a restricted free agent, and it'll be interesting to see if they, if someone else signs him to offer sheet, whether they're going to match that and they bring back Jared Allen on big money. I think they're potentially inclined to do that. With Mobley, that certainly becomes a pretty interesting front court going forward. Yeah, Nance is a guy who a lot of teams could use, and his game, you wonder whether it could translate to a meaningful role on a team that wins a lot of games. It's a very intriguing potential spot there. And you're right, at the 28th pick, you're definitely right in the range where you're going to be looking at trades and looking at options to improve for that spot. The Mavericks did that at that position last year, made sure we got ourselves in there at the 30th pick. And there's definitely a chance that, something could come off. Maybe worst case for Philly, if they're not able to do a trade, they get someone who could, potentially develop in a couple of years and be a part of a trade if they want to do something in the middle of the season to adjust their team. But you can definitely get a good player, even though this isn't necessarily the most talented draft ever. You can definitely, if you know what you're doing and you're scouting well, you can get yourself a good player, a potential NBA rotation player at that position. For me, I've got a player here who I would absolutely love to have this guy on the Mavs, but the reality is with no picks in this draft for us, and basically not only some big salaries coming down from Doncic, and obviously he's about to sign a humongous deal, and Porzingis obviously on huge money, and the priority that we now have, and it's definitely a priority for me. I hope it is for the rest of the Mavs to re-sign Tim Hardaway Jr., who's just improving the last couple of seasons and really critical in the playoffs for us last year. I think if we were able to pull off the dream, I don't know who we'd have to work in the salaries to get this trade done to potentially get this pick. I think it's probably a little bit too high, because I think this guy will get picked 6 or 7, but I really like James Bouknight the UConn player. The 6'4", crafty, smooth shooting guard.
Yeah.
He really excels moving without the ball and can score in a variety of ways. He became, I suppose, a big hit on social media, the way that he was shooting the ball at the NBA draft combine. I don't know if you've seen that clip. It was he was really stroking the ball, and the way he was moving without it and shooting it with ease. That feels like a match made in heaven for a team like the Golden State Warriors, or a team like us. Hopefully, a guy who could come in next to Doncic and really score the ball. He averaged 19 points and 6 rebounds on 45% last year. Really made a big impact on UConn in his first year. I think if he doesn't go to OKC at 6, then the Warriors will be there at 7. The Warriors definitely a team you could speak about potentially making a trade. Mavericks, and we're a little bit hindered in the way that our roster is pretty set. We can't really move many of the pieces that we've got under big contracts. We've got a lot of guys who are nicely placed in our bench rotation, and they're not going to be having a lot of value in terms of a trade. But I think if you look at the Mavs a little bit closer, Luka Doncic in the playoffs last year, 39% usage rate, which is the most of any player in the last 25 years. So we definitely need someone, if we're going to get anyone in this draft, who can play with him, who can play off of Doncic or will fit playing in an offensive system with him. Obviously, Hardaway and Redick is a guy who is a free agent who I don't know whether we can find a way to re-sign him. Jay Rich has a player option, so I expect him to pick that up, and maybe that means that we can package him in some kind of a deal if a team's interested in him. And you think about the 3 guys we drafted last year and how ready are those guys to instantly impact the team and what's going on. So Josh Green, our 15th pick, showed some flashes last year of really being capable of helping us out and doing some good things with the Boomers right now. So I think he's probably the key guy to potentially crack into the rotation next year. Tyler Bay didn't really get a lot of burn last year, and Tyrell Terry, a gifted scoring player, but I think he needs to get a bit stronger and get some more reps under himself before he's a big part of the rotation. A target that I really like for us, this I think is a little bit more swingable potentially in a trade. This guy's projected in the mock to go at about pick 24 to Houston. Houston, a team I think is definitely someone you could trade with, because they've really got no idea what their structure of their team looks like at the moment.
They've got no idea.
They're capable of anything.
Yeah.
So this guy, Trey Mann, he's a 6'5" combo guard out of Florida, and no relation to Terrence Mann, unfortunately. But this guy's got.
Are you sure? Isn't he his brother?
I thought he was, but I don't think he is, according to the internet. I'm pretty sure he isn't. Maybe he is. It'd be great.
I think he is his brother. I remember the guy that's in the draft, his last name's Mann, and someone was saying that's the Clippers' Terrence Mann's brother.
Mate, he's got good genes if he's got that, and a good head on his shoulders. But this guy, had an outstanding sophomore year for Florida, made a big jump from his freshman year to his sophomore year. He ended up 16 points a game, 5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and 1.5 steals, while shooting 40% from 3. So numbers that are not too dissimilar to the season that we had from Jalen Suggs and what I touched on before. This Trey Mann, he's a really crafty finisher, has an elite floater, which I know that you're pretty intrigued by as well. And he can score from kind of all over the floor. He's really an athletic score-first point guard. Probably his main weakness and why he's not kind of higher up on the draft board is his slight frame. He's only 190 pounds and might struggle a bit defensively. But this guy is an athletic scorer, and if we're able to somehow find him and get him in a trade, I think he would fit nicely for the Mavs.
Yeah, no, I like it, Dos. We've seen anyway, Dallas have been creative in the past with finding ways to be active and get involved in the draft, as you say, with coming in and acquiring some picks, especially just most recently last year. A man can definitely dream. So you never know. Book night, we've seen crazier things.
Mm-hmm. Maybe dream even further beyond that. Let's do Tim Hardaway Jr. Let's do whatever future picks we've got and try to get Mobley, because Mobley would be a nice fit with us. I reckon Mobley's a really intriguing prospect for a lot of teams with his versatility defensively. If he can, really start to stretch the ball with some shooting as well, you're looking at a very valuable player in today's NBA.
Yeah, they seem to make the comparison that he's a worst case scenario, some form of Al Horford, Chris Bosh type mix, and that's obviously pretty intriguing for most teams, because given the modern day players and it seems as though Mobley fits that mold to a T.
the importance of big guys in the last 2 or 3 championship teams. And you talk about Giannis, talking about Anthony Davis, and obviously the MVP, Nikola Jokic, and how much he's dominating the league right now. Embiid, if you've got a chance to nab a guy who's close to a 7-footer with elite skills, it's very tantalizing.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so that takes care of the draft. So obviously next week or when we next to our pod, there'll be some review of this that we can do, and we can obviously break down what occurred. The last thing I think to sort of mention, Das, is, and you spoke about it with speaking about where Giddey might land, was the 10th pick. So Memphis traded 17, I think a future first, as well as Valanciunas, and they got back Steven Adams, Bledsoe, and the number 10 pick. What do you make of a move like that? My initial reaction is it almost seems like Valanciunas was too good for Memphis in terms of speeding up their timeline, because they do have quite a young roster, and obviously Valanciunas puts them in an awkward spot because you could arguably say he was their best player last year. So, and most consistent, that's for sure. He showed up every night and would always be, you could always permanent marker him in for a double-double whenever he's on the floor. So that to me would signal that Memphis love someone who they think they can get at the 10th spot, whether that's a Giddey or someone else. And B, that, I think that Valanciunas is, unfortunately, he's almost too good for the current makeup of the roster, because I'm not sure finishing in the 8th, spot again, or making the play in again in the West would really do anything for Memphis. They probably don't have enough to get over the line and be a team that can make it to the second round and potentially, force their way into conference semis at this current stage with that makeup of the roster. So interesting, they took on Adams and Bledsoe as part of that. Bledsoe is most likely going to be bought out. But I suppose the two sides of it is, what do you think of it for Memphis? And then now I suppose the main thing with the Pelicans side of things is the Valanciunas fit next to Zion as opposed to Steven Adams.
I was a bit perplexed when I saw it at first. I wasn't sure if it was a real trade. I felt not quite sure. Feels a bit sideways for both teams. But if we look at it from the Memphis standpoint, it's definitely a tactical move. It's a roster building move. It's a salary kind of, how are we going to fit what we're doing going forward situation. And it's an absolute sell high, because Valanciunas couldn't have played any better than he did last year, and his trade value is never going to be any better. So to come up with the 10th pick in the draft from it, pretty interesting. And you're right, they must have someone definitely in mind for that spot, because they definitely want to pair someone else and add extra talent along with their young core that they've got at the moment with Jar and Jaren Jackson Jr. And looks like Dylan Brooks is a key part of what they're doing as well going forward at the moment. And Desmond Bane, interesting young guy that they got last year in the draft as well. So Valanciunas, you're right. I thought you're right. He's on the spot right there, that he was probably their best and most consistent player last year, maybe Jar right there with him. And it'd be really interesting to see how he goes in New Orleans. Obviously, they seeked out him as the key part of that trade, and New Orleans got off a couple of big contracts. And you got to think, if you're Memphis, you're taking on these contracts with, I suppose, there's at least a year or two, potentially at least a year to go on Adams's deal. So Adams is going to be your starting center next year and going to play that role that Valanciunas did, and that feels a very similar role. He's definitely not the scorer around the basket that Valanciunas was, and they're definitely going to miss that. But for Memphis, it opens them up to, once these contracts are off the books, for them to spend a lot of money on Jaren Jackson and obviously on Ja Morant to extend these guys and become the pillars of the franchise. They've done a lot of moves, and I guess from Memphis' standpoint, it's obvious that they were key on that draft pick, because these two players don't really make sense for the timeline of their team and what's going on right now. They've got point guards, they've got backup point guards, they've got another backup point guard after that. They've got Melton, they've got Tyus Jones, they've got Ja Morant, who's wanting to play the whole game anyway. So Bledsoe doesn't make any sense there. It feels like he's just hopping around. He's probably one of the most unhappy players in the league right now. It's to be interesting to see if he does get onto any team before the season starts. It'll be really interesting. And I think for Memphis, it's a good move. I'm very interested to see who they pick in the draft because that's ultimately what they're going to get out of this trade. And if you look at the Pelicans, they've now upgraded at the center position for sure. I think it's interesting to think about the fit because we talked about, and I think a lot of people have been talking about how what is best around Zion will be outside shooting, but Valanciunas is a very efficient scorer. He can definitely score the ball, especially around the rim. So Zion with all his driving and his attacking the hoops, they're going to be. I even think for everything that Adams is good at rebounding, Valanciunas is an even better offensive rebounder. So I think that fit, even though it's not necessarily perfect, I think they will be extremely tough. And I think they've improved themselves just a slight bit in the front court.
Well, it's very interesting for New Orleans. So you've covered off on the Memphis side of things. And I think for New Orleans, I still really would have liked to see them try and get a guy like Miles Turner. If they were looking at stuff and seeing that Adams isn't the right fit, which in terms of spacing and shooting, he definitely wasn't next to Zion. I've spoken about it before, how my ideal guy pairing next to Zion is a guy like Miles Turner. Then it's clear that if they're getting rid of Adams and Bledsoe and they're only taking on Valanciunas' contract, that they're opening up some money. And that would lead me to a couple of things. They either need the money to try and match an offer that restricted free agent Lonzo Ball is potentially going to get from maybe a New York or a Chicago that's been spoken about. So New Orleans obviously want to open up some money to be able to match an offer that he gets. Or they're happy to let Lonzo go and they really want to target a guy like Kyle Lowry because he's another name that's been floated around. So I think, again, it sort of adds to New Orleans and last year and, obviously the Stan Van Gundy experiment not working and obviously Willie Green's a new coach now. And I've heard a lot of people say it over the last 24, 48 hours since this trade's gone down, that it's almost the Anthony Davis 2.0 with Zion, that New Orleans are starting to get worried that they potentially have a deadline where they need to start building a winning team around Zion. Otherwise, he's going to look and go, not really much here for me. And I know a lot of people have thrown out that there's potential that Zion could go, you know what, I'm not going to sign the rookie extension that every rookie normally signs. And then, a couple of years into that massive deal, they then, demand a trade if they haven't seen improvement, but at least they've got the money that, they want. There's people that have thrown out the suggestion that Zion, given his marketability and stuff he can do off the court, that he can make, not all the money that he would have got with a rookie extension, but he can sort of make up or mitigate the loss of signing for a lesser deal with another team because obviously he can sign the most with the team that he's been drafted with. And then make up sort of the remaining with some of the off-court stuff with marketing opportunities and whatnot. So interesting from that side of things, and that New Orleans have suddenly gone, shit, maybe we can't have another season where, we pretty much underperform. Most teams, well, I think I had them pegged as being around there for a playing spot, and they ultimately came up short. And I think that they're worried about the timeline and potentially, Zion looking and going, I don't like this situation at all, I'm out. So I don't know how you feel about that, but that's certainly, I think, another reason to potentially think that why the Pelicans would look to make a deal like this.
I think you're right. And you also got to talk about Ingram and how, deflated he looked, and he just didn't look like he was trying that hard last year. He looked like definitely unhappy, and part of that's got to be coaching and part of that's got to be fit. And I think they've obviously gone out and got them, they've got a really strong center, one of the most productive starting centers in the league last year, particularly offensively. So that's definitely an addition for their lineup offensively. And it's, that question about Lonzo Ball it's interesting that you bring that up, and about how they've now created themselves room to potentially match an offer for him, because I do like the fit there with him. And I thought although he's a bit up and down, he could potentially be a really, really good player next year and a strong point guard, particularly defensively. And I like the fit with him and Zion still. When they're together on the court, those numbers are really good. But I also like their potential to go out and get a guy like Lowry. I think if you bring if you're able to free up the money and bring in a guy like Kyle Lowry, you instantly become a winning team. You know, whether that's a team who can genuinely contend, not necessarily, but he brings an extreme winning mentality. And I think to fit him around the talent of Ingram and Zion and a formidable center with Valanciunas, I think that team's probably will definitely play in bound, maybe playoff bound. That'd be a really interesting piece.
And they also needed the money to potentially re-sign another guy like Josh Hart. Sorry, he's a free agent as well. So I think they really value him and don't want to let him go.
I agree. Yeah, I think you talk about 3-and-D guys, he's the prototypical, he's an exceptional defender, really tries extremely hard and brings a lot of energy, one of the best rebounding guards in the league. I think that's a key signing for them to shore up their bench. And I think they have a genuine kind of prosperity about Jackson Hayes and how good he might be able to be as a backup center, because his minutes were definitely limited last year and his opportunity and obviously the significance of any of his minutes on the court was very low. But, you know, they picked him with the 9th pick in the draft last year, and we're coming almost, 18 months past that. We expect him to, I'm sure New Orleans expect him to have a serious impact next year. So getting rid of Adams and bringing in Valanciunas makes a different dynamic, and hopefully for the Pelicans' sake, he can be a big part of their roster. And I just expect them to play a whole different type of way. A new coach, they've now brought in one good significant player, and you spoke about how there's definitely more moves for them to make. It's, that you're right that they're making moves to hopefully keep Zion around and to hopefully keep Ingram happy. And I think that's really what they've got to do, and they're on the right track so far.
And you brought it up there with a couple of their young pieces. They also have some interesting guys off the bench. If you want to look at, Nickeil Alexander-Walker or Kira Lewis, who they drafted last year. And, they also have the guy that came across from the Sydney Kings, Didi Lazada, another interesting player that really played a lot of minutes for the Pelicans to end last season was Najee Marshall, if you remember him. So this
Good
isn't
size.
me off the top of my head, by the way. I'm not that good with Pelicans players. I'm just looking it up on my phone, but it's obviously a good reminder because, we haven't seen a lot of these teams in months when the season finished before the play-in. So they do have some interesting guys, but it's just a matter of, can they piece it all together? And it seems as though they potentially hated a guy like Stan Van Gundy and they didn't buy into the way he wanted to play. And maybe Willie Green, as a former player and obviously someone who's, I think, well respected around the league, that he can get some more buy-in from a lot of the guys this year. And if they can get a big coup like a Kyle Lowry on top of JV, like that's going to push them a long way. And I would expect if they can get those two, maybe you do have to then let Lonzo go as a result. But if you can bring in Lowry and re-sign a guy like Josh Hart, that makes him a definite player for not only the play-in, but I think potentially for a thing like an 8 seed.
Definitely, I agree. I think they're, the David Griffin, he's the polarizing GM. He's constantly making moves, and he's made a lot of waves since he took over that job. And obviously, he's got to admit the mistake that they made with Van Gundy. But I think they're going to be in a much better situation with Green. And I know he's been talked about very well with his any guy who's been sitting on the bench and highly respected with the Warriors in the past 5-6 years. You're coming out of as good a system as they could possibly be. So I think it's also be a bit of addition by subtraction. Getting rid of potentially what was pissing players off is now creating a lot more freedom. And I think the key will be the leadership, not only from the coach but from the players, who's going to take the reins as the leader in the locker room and the leader of this team. That'll be a real key for the Pelicans. I'm interested to see how their roster shapes up for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
People were talking about them, as a real smoky team to do something in the playoffs at the beginning of last year.
Yep.
So the intrigue has only gone up another level with their star young players getting a year older.
Yep, 100%. Okay, well, I think that wraps things up there, Das, with what is just shy of a 2-hour pod. So by far it's the record and takes the cake. So we'll see if we can beat that down the line. But yeah, hopefully people have been able to enjoy what we've spoken about. So covering the Olympics, the obviously the 5-a-side and the 3x3, the draft, and obviously some trades that have gone down and what that means for potential teams. And I'm sure before it's all said and done with the draft tomorrow, there'll be more deals that'll go down overnight or during the draft once things have kicked off. So obviously an exciting time. Fans love transactions and things moving and stuff happening. So we'll hopefully have a fair bit to talk about in regards to the draft the next time we do this pod. But thanks to everyone for tuning in as always. We appreciate it. Darcy's now going to go have some lunch and get geared up for Slovenia.
Let's go.
And if you haven't already tuned in, you've got to make it a priority, because it seems as though Luka is determined to carry that hard playing 3-point shooting group of Slovenians to a medal. And it's pretty exciting, especially when they come up against some really formidable opponents, with, as we mentioned, Spain being the first. So I think it's a really, really exciting time.
And if you're up late tonight, that this is the heart of European basketball, Argentina against Spain. Definitely check into that one for some all-time European greats in that game.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening. Oh, I got tired after all this potting. Hey, there we go.
There we go.
Knock it down.
All
All right,
right,
guys. Peace out.
See ya.